Today I want to talk about phrenology. For those who don't know, phrenology was a pseudoscience that promoted specific beliefs about the mind-body connection that became really popular in the mid-1800s. Phrenologists claimed that the pattern of bumps people have on their heads directly relate to their individual differences in personality traits and to other aspects of psychological functioning. And they claimed that these skull and scalp bumps were somehow related to the underlying brain anatomy and physiology. These claims are pretty laughably absurd to us now, given everything that we know. I think most people now seem to have a pretty good sense that this purported head bump to behavior relationship seems pretty suspicious and pretty unscientific. But I don't think many people understand exactly why it's so wrong in light of how the brain actually works. By the same token, I think there's one aspect of phrenology that actually helped along our current understanding historically by building a bridge to current concepts. So let's talk about this. Let's have some 3-pound thoughts. So this is my buddy Fred, the phrenology head. You can see that Fred has different regions on his head mapped with topographical boundaries, and each one is labeled with specific psychological traits. Love of family, marriage, cautiousness, calculation, acquisitiveness, secretiveness, dignity, criticism, philanthropy, self-love, self-esteem, love of home. This specific collection of mappings you see here between the locations of bumps and specific personality traits is the one that was most commonly adopted by prominent phrenologists in the middle of the 1800s, after they did their own research, of course. Phrenology wasn't just a specific set of pseudoscientific beliefs about the mind-body relationship. It was also a highly influential and popular cultural phenomenon. There were actually businesses and medical practices built on it. People would even have parties and gather with their friends and have a licensed phrenologist interpret their skull shapes. Look at the stinginess bump on Mortimer. No wonder he's so cheap. Science. You can see how confirmation biases and all the other human tendencies toward forming poorly founded beliefs played into this. So in light of modern systems neuroscience, what exactly is so wrong about the nature of this relationship that phrenology claims between human anatomy and psychology? Well, first of all, broad psychological constructs and personality traits are not localized to small regions of the brain, or to bumps on the scalp for that matter. These categories, traits, and functions that they name are some of the biggest, broadest, and most abstract pieces of the mind that you can think of. As if love or your intuition or philanthropy is carried out by just a small patch of neurons. But this localization issue isn't just a problem for these sort of silly characterological and trait-like functions that they came up with. Even for more scientifically amenable constructs like attention, language, memory, social cognition, those are also not localized to small regions of the brain. And you've probably heard me say this before in other videos. The brain is not a muscle, and it's not a collection of muscles. Its parts don't get bigger with greater use, and larger size does not mean that those functions are more prominent. Having brain parts that are relatively bigger than some people does not mean you have a greater propensity to use those functions more than people with relatively smaller brain regions. You know, it's really pretty easy to make fun of some of these things that we humans used to believe, back before we had a better grasp on some of these complex phenomena in our universe. So I should probably be careful to give at least a little bit of credit where credit is due. Phrenology was actually on the right track about the fact that different anatomical divisions of the brain actually have different functions. Now, that's not true about the scalp and the skull. They're not playing a big role in this. But with regard to the brain, that's actually true. The left and right cerebral hemispheres are specialized for processing somewhat different kinds of information. The frontal, temporal, parietal, and occipital lobes all handle different kinds of sensory, perceptual, and cognitive functions. And many small patches of cortex across the cerebrum, called cortical areas, do perform different kinds of processing operations and computations. So phrenologists were correct to tie human psychology to aspects of the human functional neuroanatomy. I recently read a great book about phrenology that I think you might enjoy. This book is called Mark Twain, Dr. Oliver Wendell Holmes, and the Head Readers. The author of this book is Stan Finger, who was a professor at WashU in St. Louis. He's one of the absolute world authorities on the history of neuroscience. For me, what was most interesting about this book was to hear from two highly intelligent people who lived during this period what they thought about phrenology. I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for watching.